Donald Trump as president in 2024.
When did this happen?
Nothing's happening.
Whoa, hold on. Something's kind of happening.
That may have sounded absurd shortly after his first term ended, but it is a real possibility now. And if we get a Trump Part 2, it might look a lot different than Part 1. What's up, everybody? My name is Isaac Saul, and this is the Tangle YouTube channel, where we give you the best arguments on today's news from the right and the left, along with my take. And today, we are going to talk about him.
We do not speak his name.
Donald Trump.
Why would you say it? Okay, come on.
The man who the conservative political universe seems to orbit around, and it's hard to argue it doesn't. He's dominating the 2024 Republican presidential field, and he hasn't even attended a debate. His interviews with Tucker Carlson draw millions of views. He's been indicted multiple times, but half of Republicans aren't convinced he's done anything wrong. Even with all the uncertainty surrounding those court cases, it's getting harder and harder to imagine the 2024 election won't feature former President Trump's name at the top of the GOP ticket. In other words, every conversation about the Republican candidate starts and ends with Donald J. Trump. So, what would a Trump presidency look like? What kind of things are conservatives looking forward to about the former president's rerun? What are they afraid of? What about liberals? What's their worst case scenario, and how likely do they think it will be? As I see it, there are four main camps, two from the left and two from the right. So let's get started with the left's view. Across the board, the left is fearful of a prospect of a second Trump term. Domestically, the predominant concerns center around a purging of the civil service, hardline immigration policies, and attacks on political opponents via the Justice Department. On the first point, many on the left believe Trump will attempt to fire a large swath of federal workers and replace them with loyalists. In The Messenger, Albert R. Hunt suggested Trump is planning a sweeping assertion of presidential power to control independent agencies and the civil service. He wants to throw out the sick political class that hates our country, is how Trump put it. Next, the left predicts another 4 years of Trump would mean radical changes to the U.S. immigration system. The Hill's Aaron Reichlin Melnick wrote that we would see more and more uglier fights on immigration, including efforts to restore and expand the so-called Muslim ban, this time barring immigration from even more countries. Further, Trump is in favor of picking a fight with our largest trading partner, Mexico. He has called for a naval blockade of Mexican commercial shipping ports and designating drug cartels as enemy combatants to permit U.S. military attacks. Both acts could be egregious violations of international law and might even be an act of war. Third, the left is perhaps most concerned that a vindictive Trump would use the force of his presidency to punish his opposition and remove guardrails meant to contain executive power. In the Washington Post, Ruth Marcus said this scenario would be unbelievable, except that it isn't. Trump himself has announced his intentions to do just this in what he considers a justified tit-for-tat retaliation for supposed Biden-directed targeting of Trump. During his first term, Trump's own lawyers reined in his most destructive impulses, Marcus said. But now, Trump understands this and has drawn the logical conclusion to ensure more compliant lawyers are in place the next time around. The second view from the left comes down to foreign policy and the ways the left expects Trump to double down on what they think are harmful trade policies while undermining U.S. support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. On trade, Trump's protectionist attitude could fuel further inflation while undermining America's standing abroad. The Economist wrote that Trump is mulling an across-the-board levy of perhaps 10% on all products entering the United States in one fell swoop. This plan would more than triple the average American tariff. The direct cost would be bad enough, with the tariffs functioning as a tax on consumers and hurting most producers. Yet they would also tear at America's ties with its allies and threaten to wreck the global trade system. On Ukraine and other global conflicts, the left senses that Trump's re-election would be the death knell for U.S. support of Ukraine, which would represent a major error. The Financial Times' Janet Ganish said that under Trump, the U.S. will reduce the scope or enforcement of sanctions against Russia. It will also slow the traffic of material to Ukraine. This will be justified as putting the U.S. first, but it will have the opposite effect. Nothing has done more for America's global clout since the first Gulf War than its support for Ukraine. On other issues like China, though, Trump is as liable to pull a state inward, screw the world, as to send it violently abroad. The world must feel our strength, Ganesh wrote. Don't assume then that Trump, if he feels respected on trade, is interested in containing China. So what's the takeaway here? As you might expect, the left forecasts doom and gloom for the US and the world if Trump wins back the White House. Their concerns are wide-ranging and varied, but boil down to one core idea. Trump was bad the first time around, but also inept in many ways, and if he wins again, expect him to be more effective and dangerous. All right, that is it for what the left is saying, which brings us to the right's take on this. But before we jump in, I just want to pause and let you know that if you are feeling like you are getting any value out of what we're providing here on the Tangle YouTube channel, we'd really appreciate it if you would hit subscribe, like the video, and turn on notifications. All these things help us with the YouTube algorithm. It tells YouTube there's an audience out there who wants honest looks at views from across the political spectrum, helps spread the word about what we are doing, and it would be super helpful. So please take 2 seconds and press one of those buttons for us. All right, with that out of the way, we're going to move on to the right's view. Both the left and the right agree that the Trumpiest elements of his first term would get even Trumpier, but many on the right see this as a boon and cheer on much of his proposed platform. In the words of Town Hall's David Burge, Trump and his first term revealed an elitist power structure dominated by the unrestrained deep state bureaucrats, global corporate behemoths, including media and high-tech giants, that abuse their unprecedented power to manipulate and propagandize Americans, Marxist academics and teacher unions, most elected Democrats, and establishment Republicans who are so reliant on the status quo or fearful of change as to align themselves with Democrats against the dominant conservative populism within their own party. Burge added that Trump is uniquely positioned to uproot and destroy the fascistic deep state bureaucracy that threatens our republic, to confront the globalist corporate power structure that threatens our liberty, to find and remove millions of unvetted and ineligible migrants who unlawfully have trespassed into our country. Conservative outlets like the Washington Examiner have also reported extensively on Trump's preparations for a potential second term, which back up the expectations of writers like Burge. The Examiner's Zachary Halishak and Joseph Lawler assessed Trump's recent comments and campaign posts and found that his agenda marks a sharp turn from technocratic bureaucracy. The government will be much less engaged in managing domestic programs like Obamacare and Medicare, or in promulgating and enforcing rules related to the environment, labor, or commerce. Instead, the federal government in a second Trump term would be a far more activist in a direct sense in confronting crime, homelessness, drug dealing, and other cultural woes that in the past have been commonly thought of as social rather than economic issues. Further, an aggrieved Trump would be working with a different hand of cards. More isolated, he would be less likely to staff his economic team with pro-business Democratic bankers like Gary Cohn, who directed his National Economic Council in 2017, and more likely to pick America First loyalists. And he would be working with congressional Republicans more open to his MAGA agenda. And while many, perhaps most on the right, are heartened to hear Trump outline these policy goals and priorities, there are still that group of more traditional conservatives who are not. National Review's Jeffrey Blelhar summed up his position in simple terms. Imagine the sort of person who would work in Donald Trump's second administration, given how he treated departed or fired staff during his first one, and given the stain of January 6th. Also, just for fun, imagine a Trump who, as a lame duck, what you think he cares about congressional midterms, has nobody left to owe anything to, and what he might get up to. In the Wall Street Journal, Walter Russell Mead echoed these concerns. In term number 2, he said, Trump would be more experienced, more confident in his own judgment, and less deferential to others' expertise. Mr. Trump will likely fill senior positions with people who reflect rather than challenge his instinct and priorities. Mead is especially worried about the global implications of Trump's agenda, suggesting his talent for disruption will likely have larger and more lasting consequences in a second term than in the first. He has never been a supporter of the rules-based international order, and he attaches little importance to its institutions, from the United Nations to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. He prefers transactional agreements with other powerful world leaders and considers his reputation for unpredictability one of his greatest assets in international affairs. So, the takeaway here? How the right feels about another 4 years of Trump largely reflects how they feel about him personally. The quote-unquote never Trump faction shares most of the same concerns with the left regarding Trump's propensity to tune out or punish dissent and his ongoing maneuvering to scale back the checks on executive power should he return to the White House. At the same time, there is a loud and vibrant conservative camp, probably the majority, that sees everything Trump has said and suggested about what he'd do in a second term and wants to see him go even further. Overall, there's little disagreement about what Trump would try to do as president, but the merits of his agenda have deeply divided the right. All right, that is it for what the left and the right are saying, which brings us to my take. So, for those of you who are just joining us, my take is where I give you my opinions on all the information we just shared. This is not meant to persuade you in any way. It's not meant to be right. It's just my thoughts and perspectives. And my hope is that you will leave your thoughts and perspectives in the comments section down below. We want Tangle to be a community to connect with other people, maybe those you disagree with or agree with. Just keep it respectful and remember that we're all just people looking to get a little bit closer to the truth. So from my perspective, the most interesting thing about the commentary around a second Trump term is what it implies about how Trump and his allies view his first term, that they failed in many of their policy goals.
You failed, 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 you failed.
Which is kind of surprising to me. I reviewed Trump's presidency shortly after he left office, and I gave him a lot of credit for getting so much of what he said he would get done. I didn't agree with a lot of his policy goals, but on issues like immigration, trade, foreign policy, he did follow through the script he laid out in his campaign, or at least attempted to pretty closely. Now, though, all of his rhetoric about a second term is about what he would do differently. All the people he hired or brought in are now deep state stooges, and he blames them for his failures, for upending his goals, for working behind his back to hurt him. He takes little accountability for the fact he built his administration or hired these people over and over, yet he promises now he won't make those mistakes again. Instead, he's going to surround himself with yes men. That would be concerning for any potential president, and it's concerning for Trump too. I think the most dangerous aspects of a second Trump term are all tied to his paranoia, for lack of a better term. He tends to view dissent as disloyalty rather than mere disagreement, and that is a dangerous thing to do. For instance, if he truly believes he won the 2020 election, what will he do to remedy that? How will he leverage federal power to interfere in state election law? How will he pressure loyalists in Congress to impact votes? We got those answers in 2020, and now we'll get a version of Trump that has only learned from his mistakes. Those are my biggest concerns. From a policy perspective, though, the biggest area I'd be keeping an eye on is immigration. The border crisis during Joe Biden's time in office has been very real. We've covered it over and over again, and it seems to be getting worse every week. More important than the simple fact that we seem to have lost control of our immigration system is that the issue has been brought to the doorstep of so many cities in the United States. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, two Democrats from New York, are under tremendous pressure to do something about the immigration system given the migrant crisis in New York City. Any second Trump term would coincide with that pressure unless a deal gets done before then. And I think Trump and Republicans would have a lot of the leverage, maybe all of it. This was not true in Trump's first term. Back then, the focus was on the cruelty of his policies and the ridiculousness of a border wall. Now, Trump's winning issue in 2016 will be buttressed by the fact that Biden's border policies have largely been a failure. The issue is still very salient with Republicans, independents, and even a good chunk of Democrats. And in his first term, Trump was actually quite good at reducing legal immigration, the so-called paper wall. But a second term would give him a much better opportunity to implement hardliner policies around border security, and I'd expect him to pounce at that opportunity. I'd also expect a lot more of the culture war. If you think the issues of race and gender have been dominating during Biden's first term, you can expect that to get turned up to 100 in Trump's second term. His rhetoric on things like trans issues and policing has been some of the most divisive of any politician I can think of, and I imagine we'd get weekly or even daily controversies on the kinds of debates that have been dominating school board meetings and social media over the last few years. But there are also a lot of questions. The two biggest ones for me are how Trump would handle abortion and how he would handle the two major conflicts the United States is invested in right now. That's the war in Ukraine and the Israel-Hamas fighting. On abortion, there is just so much ambiguity. Aside from one bizarre outlier interview 8 years ago where he floated the idea of punishing women for getting abortions, Trump has been far more moderate than a lot of his GOP colleagues on the issue. I suspect there are two big reasons for this. One, I don't think Trump holds genuine pro-life beliefs. He had long been a supporter of abortion rights before he jumped into the presidential race in 2016, and I think he took a pro-life position out of political expediency. Two, I think he recognizes now that being strongly pro-life is no longer a winning political position, and so he's moderating his views to reflect that. Republicans have been on a huge losing streak since Roe fell, and Trump has good enough political instincts to realize why. So, why are there questions? Because, of course, Trump successfully pulled off the biggest win of the pro-life movement in decades by appointing 3 stringently pro-life justices to the Supreme Court who came together and struck down Roe v. Wade. For the pro-life movement, that has made him a hero, and whatever his views are, he is enjoying that political reality and might be motivated to keep the streak going. So it is genuinely hard to know what he would do with a second term. Then there are the conflicts. Some of Trump's most unifying positions have long been his desire to avoid new wars, spending US money abroad, or involving US troops in conflicts. But what is happening in Ukraine and Israel now seems to be intractable, unsolvable wars, and Trump would get dropped into a situation where US policy is already humming in both conflicts. Does he pull US support for Ukraine and hand the war to Putin? Does he do something drastic like involving US troops to try to end the war swiftly? And what about in Israel? Biden seems to be restraining Netanyahu, but Trump never got in his way. Would he greenlight more settlement expansions or the expulsion of Palestinians from Gaza? How tolerant would he be of the war Israel is waging right now? I genuinely don't know, and I think few people do. We've gotten some signals, but Trump is notoriously unpredictable. Ultimately, a second Trump term would be a lot like the first. You can expect immigration to be a major focus, paranoia about enemies in the deep state to be paramount, and total unpredictability on foreign policy to be the theme. Given his legal challenges and how his first term ended, it's hard to imagine he is this close to the White House again, but the reality is, he is. All right, that is it for my take today, but I'm curious, what are you most excited about or most fearful about when it comes to a second Trump term? Let us know in the comments. I'm curious to hear from some of you guys, and we'll try and respond to some of the stuff you leave there next week. Speaking of reader comments, before we get out of here, I want to address a reader comment on one of our recent videos. Jennifer responded to our video on Israel having no good options last week by saying, "What would you say to those people who place some responsibility on the people of Gaza as they elected Hamas into leadership and allow Hamas to lead them?" So I think I would say a few things. First of all, elections happened in 2004, and half of Gaza is under the age of 18. So you can do the math on how many current Gazans played a role in getting Hamas elected. It's also worth noting Hamas has not held elections since then, and they are a very divisive group. Even to get into power in 2004, there was political violence involved. So yes, Hamas is leadership, and yes, plenty of people in Gaza support them and probably voted for them in 2004. But I think it's hard to broad brush the whole territory as being supportive of Hamas. And, just like I don't hold you accountable for everything Joe Biden does because he got elected, I don't think it's fair to hold the people of Gaza accountable for everything Hamas does just because Hamas got elected, especially not when the election was almost 20 years ago. So it is a complicated thing for sure, but I wouldn't hold the people of Gaza responsible for Hamas's actions wholesale. Though I do think it is an important part of the story that there are plenty of people in Gaza who support some of what Hamas is doing right now. All right, that is it for today's video. Don't forget, please hit subscribe, like the video, share this video with some people, turn on notifications. We're going to be bringing you more content like this in the future. And if you click that bell, it'll keep you posted anytime we have a new video. And of course, we also want to hear your thoughts. So please let us know, what are you excited about? What are you fearful about in terms of a second Trump term? Let us know in the comments. We'll be right back here ASAP. Have a good week. Peace. I gotta sneeze. No. It didn't happen.